All right, so thank you everybody for coming to Coffee and Conversation, a virtual chat with GIS professionals. As I stated in the RSVP email, this meeting will be recorded. So if you are uncomfortable with that, please let me know. We can figure something out. However, this will be recorded and sent out to all registrants after the event. So thank you again for taking the time. Going to go through some introductions to start. My name is Jake Leizear. I am a senior geospatial analyst here at the Conservancy, and I will be your moderator for today's discussion. For my background, I went to University of Maryland, Baltimore County for a degree in environmental sciences and picked up a GIS certificate along the way. I sort of broke in to the GIS field and the Conservancy through the Chesapeake Conservation Corps program. It is a Maryland-wide program focused on placing recent college graduates and folks under 26 mostly with host organizations across the Bay watershed. And I was placed with the Conservancy about 4.5 years ago. A lot of my work focuses on precision conservation, looking at where we can conserve the best land for the biggest conservation benefit, which involves a lot of prioritization across the 6 states through the watershed. I also manage a lot of external partnerships, focusing on the Chesapeake Conservation Partnership, our cooperative agreement, in part with the Chesapeake Bay program, and also do a variety of presentations and conference touring, et cetera, in times where there are presentations and conferences. But today, I'll be helping facilitate this. So please, as you come in, remember to keep yourself muted and to have any questions put into the chat, and I will pass it over to our first panelist to introduce herself, Emily Wiggans.
Hey everyone, so thanks Jake. As a little bit about myself, I am a recently promoted senior geospatial analyst with the Conservancy. I got my start at GIS doing a summer program at the University of New Hampshire, and then found myself at the University of Vermont, where I majored in environmental science and got a GIS and astronomy minor. Some of the highlights of my career that I've been lucky to have include an internship with the NASA Develop program at Langley Research Center in Virginia. And I also did Vermont EPSCoR, which is the established program to stimulate competitive research, over one summer in Burlington, Vermont. And that was an awesome opportunity because I got a lot of exposure to the programming language R, which will come up a couple times today. And then also at UVM, I worked at the spatial analysis lab with one of the professors there that I had, and he's the director, Jarlith. And we actually still at the Conservancy work with the UVM spatial analysis lab. So awesome connections for me. After I graduated in 2015, I went to go work at Stantec, which is an environmental consulting firm. They are all over the country. They're international. There are a lot of offices in Canada, especially they actually started in Canada. And so I took a job there as a CAD and GIS technician, and CAD, if you're unfamiliar, is computer assisted design. So I learned CAD skills, which was an amazing opportunity. And then I ended up transferring Stantec offices up to an office in Laurel, Maryland for a couple of months. Then I just had to say yes to a dream job at the Chesapeake Conservancy. A lot of the work that I do here is related to water quality. We work with a lot of, commonly it's been called citizen science, but we are transferring to using the term community science since it's more inclusive. So we work with a lot of community science organizations to elevate the quality of their data through our work with what's called the Water Data Collaborative. And I've also done a lot of projects as of late dealing with solar siting and where you can best put solar panels on houses and in open space to help Maryland meet its state goals for solar and renewable energy. At the Conservancy, I've been really lucky to have opportunities like presenting at the National Water Quality Monitoring Conference in Denver a couple of years ago, and also at the Esri User Conference out in San Diego. So that's some of those photos there. And like I said, background in environmental science, standing in that soil pit there, really big fan of environmental science and conservation and all of that. So if you have the opportunity to take those classes, it has only served me well. So looking forward to this, and I will pass it along.
Thank you, Emily, for the information. Next up, I'd like to introduce Patrick McCabe.
Hi, everyone. My name is Patrick. A little background about myself. I graduated from Coastal Carolina University in 2016 with a degree in marine sciences and a minor in biology, where I became interested in conservation and restoration work in the Chesapeake Bay. I then had an internship at Chesapeake Bay Foundation, where I was an intern at the Oyster Restoration Center, restoring oyster reefs throughout Maryland. I took a GIS training course hosted by Chesapeake Bay Foundation, which inspired me to pursue a master's degree, I should say, at Duke University with a concentration of coastal environmental management and a geospatial certificate. After my first year, I applied to an internship with the Smithsonian Environmental Research Center, where I worked on a project that would become a part of my thesis. I developed a model using GIS, Python, and our Studio, which is statistical software we'll talk about later, to determine invasive blue catfish habitat in the Patuxent River. After I graduated, I would continue to volunteer with Smithsonian Environmental Research Center, and search for jobs, applying to many positions and networking on a weekly basis. And I'll get into more of that later. And I then got a temporary position at Maryland Department of Natural Resources, where I sampled tidal and non-tidal rivers throughout Maryland, the Chesapeake Bay, and coastal bays for water quality. I then applied to this position at Chesapeake Conservancy as a geospatial analyst, which I just started last year in November. I work on land use and land cover data sets and modeling efforts for the Chesapeake Bay program, as well as conservation prioritization work for local land trusts. Thanks.
Thank you, Patrick, and we're super glad to have you on the team, and it's been a great 4 months already working with you. Last but not least, I would love to introduce Rachel Soobitsky as our final panelist.
Thanks, Jake. Hi, everyone. So my name is Rachel Soobitsky. As Jake said, I am a geospatial program manager at the Chesapeake Conservancy. I have been here for almost 4 years now, and it's been awesome. So just a little bit of background about myself. So I went to undergrad at the University of Maryland, College Park. I was an environmental science and policy major with sustainability as my minor. And this is a College of Agriculture and Natural Resources. And throughout undergrad, I did a variety of, unfortunately, unpaid internships, but they were at least giving me experience, not related to GIS at all. I worked for the Sierra Club, Maryland chapter, some sustainability consulting firms, and a few other different unpaid internships. But I took 2 undergrad classes. It was Intro to GIS and Intro to Remote Sensing. That was my only GIS experience in undergrad. And I really loved the classes. They were different than all my other classes, like actually more hands-on and doing really cool things with, still related to environmental science. But after undergrad, I wasn't positive I wanted to continue with GIS. So my first job, this is not really in order on the screen here, but it was at the bottom, it's EQR, Environmental Quality Resources. That is a stream restoration company. You can see that picture of me in the excavator machines there on the right. That was more field work. We were, hands-on doing stream restoration on the ground in the woods every single day. It was definitely a really cool experience, especially now, and you'll see kind of tying it back into what we're doing now to get that different perspective. But that wasn't, what I wanted to do long-term. So I kept thinking about those GIS classes I took, and I was like, how can I get in this field? I only had 2 intro classes. So I not reapplied, but back to University of Maryland, but for the master's program. They have a master's in geospatial information science program, and there's a certificate path. I think it's 15 credits, and then the master's program is, I think, 30 credits of courses. So I applied to that and got in, and then of course I was doubting myself because a lot of it's Python classes and different coding classes, and they say you need a prerequisite of having some coding classes before, and I've never had a coding class. So I was worried about going and doing a master's level coding class and, talk to the program people, the professors, and they were like, just try to teach yourself or, take a few, there's lots of online resources or get a textbook and try to give yourself some base knowledge and you'll be fine. So I did that even though I was really scared. And it worked out well. It's actually meant for working professionals, so you can work during the day, and the classes are at night, I think 5 o'clock or 5:30 onward. And they have all, even before COVID, they had all online options, so you didn't have to ever come in person if you didn't want to. So that was really great. And during that program, I did a variety of different jobs. And I found all of these jobs actually through the listserv. That from joining the program, we were on a job listserv, so they emailed out about these jobs and I applied to them. The first one was with EMCS, which stands for Engineering Management and Consulting Services. So they placed me with NOAA at the Office of Satellite Ground Services, where I was the one GIS person on this engineering project that's related to satellites. And I was like, you know, I didn't have any GIS work experience at the time. I just was in the program. So it shows that you can, you know, you are able to get a job in GIS even without the work experience. I think as long as you show you have classes or experience and maybe the passion for it, I think that really helps. And maybe the creative thought process, they had me work through a problem and like go through how would I go about solving this problem in GIS. And they liked that I thought outside the box, apparently. I didn't know I was doing that, but it helped me get that position. So I was there for a little while, and it was just a contract position, I think 6 months. And then I also applied for the NASA Develop program that Emily Wiggans talked about earlier, which was really cool. I was at Goddard Space Flight Center in Greenbelt, Maryland. And this program is awesome because, you know, it's only, I think, 6 weeks or 10-week program. So it's short, but it combines environmental science with remote sensing and GIS. So if that's what you want to do, this is a really great program for that. So it's a shorter program, but it gets you, you know, work experience. You get to present, you know, your work at the very end of the program, and you work on a collaborative team, and it is paid. That's right. So then after that, I applied for this position. This is also like dream job in my mind. Again, environmental science with GIS, remote sensing. It seemed great. I also heard about this from the UMD listserv. And, you know, this is just kind of a tidbit of like some advice I would say is that I applied for I think a project manager position with, you know, my only project management experience was one class in grad school that I had. So I think it was a little bit above what I maybe could normally get, but I was like, I'm going to apply to it because it seems like a great job. And they came back and they said, how about you interview for a senior analyst position? So I interviewed for that. And then when they gave me the job offer, it was actually for an analyst position. So they gave me the job that fit my, you know, work experience and my school experience. And so I would always say, go for it. If it's a company or organization you've been wanting to work for, still apply, because you never know what else they might need. And this is all, again, I was still in grad school. I was able to start this job while finishing up my program. Sorry if I'm going over on my time, but I think that's about it. So Jake can go to the next slide.
Yeah, so that's great. Thank you, Rachel. It's super informative. And we'll be talking a little later about general career advice and how that looks within this field. But we wanted to talk very briefly at the top about who the Conservancy is and what kind of work we actually do in our day-to-day lives in regards to the kinds of technology, the kinds of data, the kinds of projects, etc. So I'm going to pass it back to Rachel, who's going to walk us through that just a little bit.
Yes, thanks, Jake. So again, we're the Chesapeake Conservancy, and more specifically, the GIS team is the Conservation Innovation Center. It's their logo at the top right there. So we are a nonprofit based in Annapolis, Maryland. Of course, we're all teleworking now, so for about a year almost, which is crazy. But we normally are in Annapolis, Maryland. And we our main mission is to connect and conserve and restore the land and waters of the Chesapeake Bay watershed. And we do that with innovative technology, such as our GIS team mainly. And basically, we do a lot of work in the Chesapeake, but we do, have projects outside of the Chesapeake Bay. I would say maybe 80 to 90% are within the Chesapeake Bay, but we do work, out west. We do work in, Colorado or Arizona sometimes. A lot of the products that we produce can be replicated in other geographies and still help them with different water issues, maybe more water quantity issues versus water quality, which we focus on a lot with the Chesapeake Bay. I think next slide, unless you have anything to add, Jake. Nope. All right, so one of the big things that our GIS team does is data production. We also do use our data for different projects, but we do produce a lot of high resolution land cover, land use, and hydrography data. So on the left there is the National Land Cover Database from USGS, and it's 30-meter resolution. It's across the entire United States, and it is, I think, every 4 years, I think. The most recent one is 2016. And this is a great data set. It's really comprehensive. They have a lot of different classes, and of course, it's great scope, since it's across the entire United States. But we found a need for, more, higher resolution data set for the work that we do to conserve the Chesapeake Bay and to identify restoration projects on the ground. So if you want to go, there you go. So there's our high resolution land cover and land use data set. It's 1 meter resolution across the entire Chesapeake Bay watershed. And again, we have some in Pima County, Arizona, and Denver, Colorado. Like, we've done a few projects outside the Bay, but for 2013 and 14, that's the latest date of this land cover data set. And we are actually now updating to 2017 and 18, and then again in the future, and doing a change data set between the dates. This, you can now see on that property, there's, a stream running through that you couldn't see before, and, where each individual tree is. So when you're trying to identify what projects to put in the ground, now you can really gauge what's going on the landscape. And to do this, we use NAIP imagery, NAIP imagery, which is the National Agriculture Imagery Program from USDA. This is free imagery. You can download it. You can use USGS Earth Explorer. That's a great resource to download this imagery, or the National Map Downloader. I think that also might have the imagery. We also use LiDAR often to get height of buildings and differentiate from the impervious roads from buildings and tree canopy from low vegetation that might look very similar. And then on the right is our hydrography data set that we are still developing right now. It is in blue. You can see it really gets the width of the streams, and it follows all the concaves and all the different path of the stream. And you can see the red line is the National Hydrography data set, which again is nationwide. It's maybe more comprehensive in terms of geography, but we are developing this higher resolution hydrography network for the Chesapeake Bay watershed. And in combination with the land cover, we can tell a better picture of what's going on the landscape and where we can put restoration projects. And I think next slide, Jake.
Mm-hmm.
So all these data sets really help us with precision conservation and restoration, which Jake did mention a little bit in his introduction. But it's basically about getting the right practices in the right places at the right scale. So basically, trying to get the best worth for your money. You don't want, if you only have a certain amount of funds for a project you want to put in the ground, and you have 2 different opportunities for where you could plant trees, against a stream, for example. You want to identify what can make the biggest impact on, on the left or the right side of the stream. And our data can really help identify where the best practice would be put and where it could make the biggest impact for water quality in the Chesapeake Bay. So, we do different prioritizations. Patrick mentioned we work with local land trusts. We help prioritize easements, through parcel scale analysis. Basically, easements are when you stop the property from being developed further so that you keep it pristine, and it helps with water quality so you're not building on that property. So yeah, I think that's it for what our organization does. It's really collaborative environment. Sorry, I just go into like our team a little bit. Back to GIS labs, an open office, and we collaborate a ton, even if we're not working on the same project. We all help each other out with that, and we collaborate a lot with our partners. That's what I love about the team atmosphere there. And I think other cool thing about this job, and maybe this is GIS in general, depends on the organization maybe, but like back when I first started, like I would work on one project for a while or sometimes multiple, but the next project was something totally different. Like I had to think totally differently and do a lot more research, and a lot of it's innovative where you can't always Google how to do it. Sometimes you have to like come up with your own methodology with what you know and what tools you know. So I do think I learned the most about GIS on the job compared to college, because my classes at UMD were, I think they were 10 weeks. So it's really, rapid and sometimes hard to like absorb that information. So yeah, I really loved working here. And I think that's it for me.
Great, thank you, Rachel. And before we get into, we've already started to touch on it a little bit. Before we get into some of the pre-submitted and asked questions in the chat, we wanted to go over some general threads of advice that we thought as professionals in the field could be of use for people who are trying to break in or trying to do more with GIS and environmental science as a whole. So some of the key pieces of general advice that really we were finding was just variety. Try to apply to as many things, get a variety of folks to read and look at your cover letter and what that looks like. Basically applying to events like this really started out with someone emailing us asking for more information, asking to take a look at a resume and some skill sets. So basically just try to get your face and your name out there as much as possible. And I'm actually going to pass it over to Emily Wiggans to go over the important skills list a little bit.
I hope you guys appreciate the Napoleon Dynamite reference. To Jake's point, I think having a variety of folks read your resume is super important, as well as a cover letter. We have a variety of ages at the Conservancy with a variety of skills and a variety of departments, and you just never know who your resume and cover letter is going to be read by. And it hits differently, I think, depending on, if a millennial reads it or a Gen X reads it or whatever. So I would say always make sure you have a variety of folks reviewing that so it translates how you want it for anyone who might be looking at it. I also think there's a lot of value in customizing your resume a little bit depending on the job that you're applying for. One of the questions that we got was what keywords to use and stuff like that. Obviously, for the Conservancy, anything in the conservation and protection and any other environmental things like that are going to stand out to us, but not necessarily if you're looking for a job with like an oil and gas company, which not hating on jobs at the oil and gas company at all, but just make sure you're tailoring it for what you apply, and that will definitely help you stand out, I would say. And then as for other important skills, like Jake said, variety is definitely the spice of life. We use so many things across a variety of the projects that we have. I think at minimum, the Esri suite of software, and I'm guessing most folks are familiar with Esri, but it's the big GIS software company, and it's kind of like the Microsoft equivalent of the GIS world. So anything that Esri does, if you have familiarity with it, that's only going to serve you. And as well as, anything that's web-based. So much of what we do now is web-based, both working from home and just the direction I think everything is going. And then coding has come up a couple times already, and some questions we got about coding languages as well. A lot of what we do is in Python, but also R, as we mentioned, statistical programming language. And so Python and ArcPy within the GIS environment in ArcPro. And then I touched on it a little when I was introducing myself, but any background that you have for applied GIS, I think, is another really great way to stand out. And Patrick and Rachel and Jake all, took classes outside of GIS in the environmental realm, in the marine realm. And I, like I said, environmental science. And so having an understanding of the concepts behind the data sets that you're using. For example, if you use the soil data sets from the USDA Surgo, if you understand why some soils drain better than other soils, that will help make you a better GIS analyst. And that's, whatever career path that you use GIS in. If you go into public health with GIS, understanding very relevantly, how pandemics can spread and all that. So I think the applied nature can really help you stand out as well. It doesn't have to. There's certainly base GIS skills that will help you get, a footing anywhere. And I had no background in the electrical grid for the solar projects that I'm working on, so you can always learn. But I think those are some things that help you stand out. As well as communication, we all talk about what we do a lot. Example A today. And then always got to be creative in the solutions that you're finding and how you're interacting at the office, especially now that we're all working remotely. So hopefully those are some solid base tips, perhaps some you already knew, but maybe a couple others that will be helpful for you guys.
Yeah, I would just add to that, I feel like just, again, like passion for the work or the job that you're applying to and doing research about that organization, and just willingness to learn, like Emily Wiggans mentioned, like she didn't know much about the power grid, but now she's an expert. Like she put in the time and the research to learn about it. So I think just, willingness to learn and like passion for the job or the topic, I think comes a long way. Like, we know people learn a lot on the job. So I think that's okay as well.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's kind of it's a little corny, but like if you're looking to apply to an organization, especially a smaller one like the Conservancy, if you're liking their content, our content on social media, I think it gets noticed over time. Patrick is smiling because he's definitely one of the people that likes stuff on social media, as am I. So those are definitely perhaps obvious, but overlooked things that will get some name recognition perhaps for you.
Awesome. So that's more so a general spread of what we see as some general advice to break in, et cetera. But we also recognize that you all have questions. So we had a slew of questions pre-registered from our RSVP. So thank you for doing that. We're going to sort of attack them by category, try to hit the broadest strokes of each one of them based on how we categorize them. So we're going to start off with the general job and internship search, really looking to find internships, break into this field, and how to start. So Patrick, I want to start with you as the most recent member of the team here at the Conservancy and the Conservation Innovation Center. What do you see as important for finding internships, finding new positions? Sort of like how did you attack that process?
Well, so what I did was I made a list, and we're going to provide you this list later and email it to all of you. But basically what I would do is I would find all the organizations that I would ever want to work for and combine them into a list. And then I would, every week, I would check each one of them, or try to check each one of them. Eventually it became too much per week. Their job postings, and write down the dates, and apply if I found a position that looked relevant to my experience. Another tip for that, eventually when it became too large, I would start following all of them on social media, which actually helps you do that work for you, because they'll post, all their job descriptions and postings, and yeah, that helped a lot. Searching for like keywords, definitely just GIS, analyst, spatial, definitely keywords of any of the topics you're interested in, obviously.
So I think that's a good point, Patrick, to point on that the GIS field itself is slightly diverse. So even though analyst, project manager, program manager, anything with geospatial does have a standardized effect to it, please make sure to read the descriptions for any posting like this, because an analyst at a small nonprofit versus an analyst at a corporation or a larger organization versus a federal level spatial analyst or a geographer could all be a variety of skills and tasks. So while that's a great place to start off with your searching in terms of keywords, please read the descriptions. And to touch on the salary point just a little bit, Glassdoor is also another really great resource to find salaries for positions if they are not listed directly in the position itself, because some organizations do not do that. So I think that is a great opportunity to start with. And Wiggans, for non-US citizens, just to touch on this briefly, can you talk a little bit about applying within the Conservancy specifically?
Yeah, I can address this for the Conservancy. I was checking with our HR group, and unfortunately, we're a smaller nonprofit, and so we aren't able to have the resources that to let us sponsor non-US citizens to work right now. It would be great if we could do that, one day, and that would be a wonderful thing for us to work towards. But there are definitely opportunities out there for that, and I would just say check with the companies that you're interested in for that specifically. And unfortunately, all I can just say for us is that's not something we're able to have the resources to do right now. We had a couple questions about that.
Yeah. So thank you, Emily. And the last point on the search and application, Rachel, if you want to touch a little bit on salary negotiations and how that looks, just like general advice.
Yeah, so I always am like all about negotiating your salary. Once you get a job offer, they're gonna, come in with a salary, and there's no harm in trying to ask for a higher salary. I mean, it's got to be reasonable, but I think most organizations will expect someone to come back and try to, negotiate a little bit. They're not gonna take away the job offer. Like, you've already been offered the job. I think it's really beneficial to try to negotiate, because from then on, all your promotions and raises are going to be, percent based from where you started. And then even when you switch jobs, usually it's a certain percent jump from what you were at your other job. I mean, it depends on the next job, but I think always got to advocate for yourself, always push for a higher salary. I think a lot of minorities or, women in GIS, or just in any field, tend to not negotiate for themselves. And I think it's really big. It's a big, important thing to do. And again, don't be nervous to do it. Everyone's the jobs are probably expecting a little bit of negotiation.
So it's a great thing to start off with as you're sort of entering this field for the first time. You are your own best advocate when navigating these conversations. So just to keep things moving along, we talked a little bit at the top about education, formal or on your own. And for full transparency, half the panel today does have graduate degree experience and the other half does not. Emily and myself did not complete a graduate program. We enter the field in different ways, me through the Conservation Corps, Wiggans through a variety of internships and jobs. So we would say that for looking for education, we're not looking always for a direct pathway. If you have relevant work experience, if you can find the best opportunities or pathways that might not be through a master's degree, but through other work opportunities, that's not going to disqualify you. It's really about how you are able to message and show those experiences for yourself. So on the job experience equivalents will usually do you just as well, depending on the position and experience itself, of course. But for trying to get in a graduate program, because we have representatives here from Duke and UMD, Patrick and Rachel, what do you think was the thing that drew you to those programs? And whoever wants to go first.
I guess I can talk about me first, or my experience with the master's program first. I mean, it sounds a little boring, but because I went to University of Maryland for undergrad and for the master's program, but I was able to live at home and save money while, being able to also commute to the program itself, because I wanted to try to do the classes in person, although there are people all over the country that, just joined online. But I love that that was a bit, flexible. If there were days I had to work late or the commute was too long, I could just go home and sign in online. And the classes were all recorded as well, so you could totally watch them, not even when they were happening live, and you can rewatch them, which is great. And I believe I could still even have access to the recordings and PowerPoints, which I have pulled up, in my job when I we talked about this in class, let me try to find the PowerPoint. So that really drew me to University of Maryland. And I know it doesn't sound exciting and it's not a very diverse set of, degrees. It's just all from University of Maryland, but I do think it's a great program and they have great resources, and it's how I found all my job experience, like job fairs or that listserv that I mentioned. So that's really what drew me to that program.
Fantastic. And Patrick, why don't you talk a little bit about your time at Duke and how you got involved?
So what drew me to Duke was the variety of programs they had. We had all kinds of concentrations, coastal environmental management, which I was mostly interested in. And then they had all kinds of other programs like, business and environment, economics, environmental economics and policy, ecotoxicology, just a few to name. The geospatial program is very well-renowned. And when I took the tour and everything, I was impressed by the Career Center. They had a really great Career Center and staff and a great alumni network. They refer to everyone in the environmental field from Duke as the Duke Mafia, which is kind of true. We have four alumni in Chesapeake Conservancy now. So, and
I was about to say we might have more. Is it 4? I feel like we have so many Duke masters.
I think it was more before, right? We got Jeff,
I think so.
Emily, Susan, and Joel. Joel is the president and CEO. And I felt like at Duke they really pushed you to work with clients. Like, for example, for that internship in the summer, I was able to apply for a grant for it because I just made that position with Matt Ogren at Smithsonian Environmental Research Center. So I was able to apply for a grant so I could be paid for the summer of the work I was doing and then incorporate this into my thesis. So they have really great resources in that sense.
And just to answer, sorry, just to answer Madeline's question about applied certificate program compared to the master's program, that was a big debate for myself too. There was like, at least for Maryland, they had two different options. I'm not sure if Duke did as well, but I know it's half the credits, and that means obviously easier financially to do the certificate program. And I have a feeling like the certificate program would have been enough to get the same job that I got now. I think it's it's still showing that you're taking classes in GIS, and it's still it's something that you can put on your resume. It's a certificate program. The only difference, I guess, is you're taking less classes. So I'm not sure which. I think you might get to kind of pick and choose, but you maybe wouldn't end up taking a Python class. That would be really beneficial, to have taken. So I think the only difference is, you're taking half the amount of classes, so you're losing that potential learning opportunity. But I think to get this job, it would have been fine to do a certificate. As we've shown, people don't always even have the master's specifically, but I guess they did have undergrad experience in GIS. So kind of a give and take.
Yeah, I actually did finish a certificate program in undergrad for GIS specifically, and I think one of the major parts of that is it is a little difficult sometimes to find GIS specific undergraduate programs. They're usually wrapped into geography as a whole, as compared to just GIS. And the benefit of certificate is that you now have something on your resume that says you were qualified in GIS professionally. So I think at the end of the day, that makes it worth it. And it does get your chance to focus your time while in undergrad or even beyond that. I would recommend it as post-educational learning if you have that possibility. And I know Wiggans had a specific point to you that you wanted to raise.
Yeah, I just think it's really awesome to always be learning. And so I definitely have not ruled out a master's for myself, but I, for one, am still paying off my undergrad loans, to be honest. And so I just didn't want to throw myself back in the deep end, but there are a lot of online courses out there that you can get either a certificate or a master's in. I'll plug for University of Vermont. They have a GIS certificate program as well. And Penn State, I believe, also has a really robust GIS program. And I know the director of the Spatial Analysis Lab cross teaches at Penn State. So I would say good things about that, even though I don't know a whole lot.
Welcome to.
So thank you, Emily. And also we're talking a lot in academia, but there are more resources outside of that for continued learning that we'll touch on at the end of the presentation as sort of a take-home present for everybody. However, I want to touch a little bit in the section about on-the-job education versus stuff that you brought to the job. And I know, Emily, you pointed to this a little bit in your introduction about learning more about electrical grid and solar work. So do you want to talk a little bit about things you picked up while working here versus things you brought to the table?
Yeah, so Jake is totally correct. I have been thinking about this a lot lately, and I think if I could have learned one thing in college, taken another class that would have been helpful to my job, again, to my point on applying it to things. So like, it's not very glamorous, but the Clean Water Act drives a lot of the policy that we have in the Chesapeake Bay with the TMDL, the total maximum daily load, and pollution diet essentially is what it is if you're not familiar, for the Chesapeake Bay. So a lot of laws like that actually drive a lot of the policy that we're working towards in GIS. And frankly, that was my experience in consulting as well. So I didn't take a class on the Clean Water Act, and that is definitely some of the things that I have picked up. Solar regulations, it's honestly a lot of policy based stuff for my personal experience. But I also came into it, knowing from school how to delineate a watershed. So those skills fit really nicely together. And I think the difference of on the job is just that applied technical knowledge that you can get from having a GIS background.
Right. And thank you, Emily. I think a large part of this too is that the reality is no one is the messiah or savant of GIS other than maybe Jack Dangermond. But I would say that there is a whole wide world of resources out there to continue learning. And that's something really we foster here at the Conservancy is, okay, we don't know how to do this. Does someone else on the team know how to do it? And if not, as a partnership-led organization that reaches out to other professionals in this field, the Chesapeake as a whole is a very tight-knit group of organizations. So there's luckily more experts out there to rely on. So it's never an issue of, oh my gosh, you don't know that. It's an issue of how are we going to find this out and what does make sense to get there.
And also just wanted to add, a lot of organizations will help, really want you to have professional development opportunities, like going to conferences where you could attend a session on a topic that you want to learn more about. We've gone to a lot of the ESRI, the sessions or the conferences, and now they're virtual, unfortunately, but it's a great opportunity to just learn more and do professional development or present at conferences, or even take a course that might be something that you can show that's beneficial for work, but sometimes your job might pay for a course if it's reasonable and related to work, and that way you can do that as well.
The Conservancy really values its employees and has given us a lot of opportunities for learning more ourselves professionally at conferences and networking in that way, and learning our own skills from each other. And that is something we are all super lucky to have here for sure.
So we're going to keep it moving on to the next category for questions here. So first, an early career job advice. I'm not sure for the three of you, this is probably not the case, but for me, I started the Conservancy fresh out of undergrad. Like I came here this summer after I started. So I've really found my whole experiences through this. But that helped with a mentorship program. The Conservancy or Conservation Corps has a direct mentorship program built into it, with providing me a mentor on staff here at the Conservancy. But that's not always the case for everyone. So Patrick, can you tell me a little bit about finding a mentor and what that looks like and that sort of process for you?
Yeah, so basically mentors can be anywhere. They literally, a lot of mine are alumni or people I just happen to have met through like very strange connections. Like what at CBF, my mom did one of my coworker's hair, and that's how I got a connection there. And what I usually do with that is for networking is I would email them to have set up a time to meet, either in person. Obviously we can't do in person right now, so a phone call as well. I would write out specific questions about what I'd like to know about what they do, organizations that that I could probably work for given my specific skill set, and really learn about what their organization does and skills needed for furthering my career or education path going forward. And I always found that very important. I connected with Joel Dunn this way. Actually, I went out to a event at Mallows Bay to meet with him, and then we met, and he gave me a list of names also to talk to as well. And it's kind of like a snowballing effect. Once you get one name, you can ask for others, and it'll keep going like that. And I found that to be one of the best ways to network, is having a group of mentors. I mean, some don't always pan out. Sometimes they're too busy and stuff, but I found this was definitely the best way to get your name out there and really learn about other organizations.
I think one factor that Patrick didn't mention because he's being modest is having enthusiasm. And you did mention preparation when you talk to people, but doing the background. So you ask, relevant questions that will show that you care and that you're appreciative of their time. That it's not a ton of effort, but it makes a huge difference. And like I said, enthusiasm and passion go a long way as well, because cold emails, like Patrick said, sometimes pan out, sometimes they don't. LinkedIn, alumni networks, all of that. But passion and enthusiasm and background, you know who you are on this call today who did that, and that's why we're here. So that is definitely key.
So I want to hit one of the more general questions at the bottom of this list, and I'm going to ask this to everyone, but I'm going to start what we wish we would have known going into this field. I think for me personally, within the environmental science and GIS world, it is super helpful to know the who's who. Like Patrick said specific names, but having the understanding of who the organizations are and what they're doing is really key, because then you have a step up in terms of lingo and understanding what the state of affairs is in the field. That's why opportunities such as this, general conferences such as FedGIS that's coming up very soon, and just the general Esri Summit, but any sort of Chesapeake level or environmental science level event to really be an understanding of like, oh, that's the Chesapeake Bay Foundation. They do this. Fish and Wildlife Service does this stuff. So having a good understanding of the players in the field, not just the names of the people in them, but the actual organizations is something that I think is super beneficial. So really just get to Googling, try to find the public events, and then you see the same organizations pop up again and again. And those are the players that you really want to be reaching out to. So this is a question for everybody. So I want to start with Rachel. Let's go up the list.
Yeah, so I think for me, I wish I had taken more coding classes. I mean, that's like a really specific piece of advice, but it can only help. I mean, anything that you do in GIS can end up being automated and made, much faster and easier process. So I think, I wish I had maybe paid more attention or just really absorbed the coding classes I had. In the University of Maryland program, we did like, JavaScript and Python, and I think SQL. So there's like a bunch of different languages, and it was hard for me to really absorb each of them because they're all different in their own ways. But I wish I had kind of grasped that a little bit better. And that's always been my goals for myself in this organization, is like get better at coding. And all you really need to do is like, okay, instead of doing this in ArcGIS, like let me try to code it. Like I always could be pushing myself to do that, but for me, it's just my brain doesn't work that way right now. So it's just easier for me to do it the way that I'm more comfortable with. And also, this is related, but even if you have a job that doesn't use GIS and you want to try to get into that field, I think you can just try to brainstorm projects that you could maybe bring to the table and say, hey, like, can I try using GIS? There's also open source software like QGIS that you could download and use, and try to bring that to the team, and then you put it on your resume, and then it's just a way to incorporate that into your day-to-day job, even if it's not technically a GIS job. And I think a lot of companies, even outside of environmental companies, can benefit from GIS. There's a ton of different applications, not just what we're talking about mostly today. So I think just if you take initiative and try to think of a project, or how can you make the organization, work even smoother with this map that shows X, Y, and Z, or something like that, I think that's some good advice.
All right, Emily, do you want to speak on what you wish you had known going into this job?
I'm going to second Rachel with coding. I took one Python class in college. I got the basics, but again, some of it's just so applied that you only know once you get into the job that you're doing it for. But if anyone walks away with any knowledge, please take Python, learn Python through free Esri resources. Otherwise, that is a good thing to have on your resume. Otherwise, I made some quick notes. Jake's point, I definitely agree on, but I also think until you're kind of immersed in the environment, it is tough to distinguish between the Chesapeake Bay Program, the Chesapeake Conservancy, the Chesapeake Bay Foundation. There's more Chesapeake organizations out there. We get called the wrong name with some frequency. It is key, and do your research and try to figure it out, but also make sure you give yourself a break, because it is tough to know it all in the beginning, and there is a lot. And then for me personally, I will say I wish I had a better background understanding of just like computer infrastructure. And I've really been taking a larger role on and managing the back end, along with one of my colleagues, Emily Mills, of the CIC's web and web GIS infrastructure. So knowing how servers work and all of that, that's going to be a really important skill too. There's lots of things you can Google, Reddit, explain it to me like I'm 5. Frankly, I'm on there fairly often. And then the last one I wanted to point out, and we did get some questions about like portfolios, submitting, websites, examples of your work. I think a couple of us have made the point that we still refer to slides in GIS classes that we took or projects we did in the GIS lab. So I do think saving all of that, saving your notebooks, that's all key too. And I did some of that, wish I could have done more. So.
All right, and Patrick.
Yeah, I'm just gonna reiterate what Rachel and Emily said. Yeah, definitely keep up with Python. I took Python courses at Duke. I'm sure everyone who's on the call at Duke's taking advanced geospatial analysis right now. Yeah, practice after you graduate. I wish I practiced a little bit more, and I wish I saved a little bit more stuff that could help me right now. I'd also like to add that, yeah, well, another helpful tip is definitely volunteer as much as you can. Usually in between when I was going to grad school and after grad school, I was volunteering a lot. So with any organizations that can take your help, obviously you want a job to support yourself, but if you can't, in the meantime, just volunteer. And also don't be afraid to take a temporary job. I took that temporary job with Maryland DNR just to get my foot in the door. And I'm really glad I did that. And I learned a lot from that job about the Chesapeake Bay and the network, working with different stakeholders and such.
Yeah, it is scary doing a temporary job too. I think my NOAA contract was 6 months and it had it could get renewed. And I was like, gosh, like what if it doesn't? But it ended up getting renewed, or, but I ended up, that's when I took the job at Chesapeake Conservancy. But you just gotta, it's experience, even if it's temporary experience, and build resumes, build connections, like Patrick said.
Yeah,
that's good advice.
I felt like when I had my job at DNR, I got more interviews than I did before. So definitely, it's better to have a job than not have a job. Yeah.
All right. So thank you both to everyone. We got a couple of questions coming up in the chat that I think could use some time. So I want to get to those. So what we're going to do is move to one last general question for everybody, and then we'll address the two major questions that went up in the chat, and then we'll share the resources that we've been hinting at throughout this session, just because it is almost 1 o'clock already. So my last major question for everyone on the panel is, what do you like most about working in GIS? And I think for me, the answer is I can see direct applications and benefits of the work. Environmental science in general is an incredibly present and concerning issue for a variety of people. Just look at Texas right now and the way that climate change, energy infrastructure, and work has sort of collided into this state level emergency. So the direct applicability of this work, I think, is one of my most favorite things about working in this. So let's start again at the bottom, Rachel.
Yeah, so my favorite thing is, I kind of touched on it a little bit earlier, just about how there's such a different variety of types of projects you can use GIS for. So for me, I've never really been bored at my job. I know there could be some jobs out there that you're doing similar things every single day, but I feel like with GIS, there's always something's always crashing that shouldn't be, and the error 9999s that are terrible, and you get really frustrated. But it's like, keeps you on your toes, and it's never, every day it seems to be different, and all the projects seem to be different. And maybe that's just with the Conservancy somewhat, but I think it's exciting and it keeps me like passionate about the topic, and yeah.
All right, Emily.
I echo what Rachel has said, and I'll also add that for a long time, I wanted to be a horse veterinarian. Then I realized it was too much school for me. And then I got really into astronomy and space, and I am still really into astronomy and space. Great Mars rover landing today at 3:55, plug for NASA. But a lot of the sensors that are orbiting the Earth are the same that are flown on airplanes. And so I first really fell in love with remote sensing, which we do some at our job here at the Conservancy. We definitely, 4-band NAPE imagery that Rachel mentioned, looking at the infrared band for vegetation and stuff. So I love the connection to some of my other passions and interests. I'm also into birding, and the birding data on the eBird, it's all mapped. So I just see it connecting in a lot of different areas of my life. And ultimately, I just love that I really feel what we do makes a difference in a scale that we notice. I don't want to steal Patrick's thunder, because I've talked about, I know he talks about this too, but seeing water quality change over time as a result of practices that have been put in by our partners is just incredibly rewarding to me.
Fantastic. And Patrick.
Yeah, making a difference in your local community. I mean, right now I'm working with a local land trust, identifying conservation and restoration potential sites within this county that I grew up in, which is, you know, an amazing feeling. Um, and getting to do things that no one has ever done before. Like Rachel and I, and I'm sure Emily and Jake have done this too, but we're working on things that no one has ever even attempted. And these products will be directly used by management to, you know, improve water quality and other outcomes in the Chesapeake Bay. So it's a really great feeling, and it really fuels me to keep going.
Awesome. Thank you, everybody, for those answers. They were deeply appreciated. So we have about 3 minutes left on the board here. So we've been getting questions in the chat, and we'll be sending out the answers to those directly as part of the materials post-meeting. But thank you again. So to wrap it up, just be conscious of time. I know we want to get to the resources that are left here. There's been a lot of conversation today about resources in regards to GIS courses and classes. There's a list here. We'll be sending out the slides, so don't worry about trying to write down the links immediately. I would also recommend, it's not on this list, but YouTube is an incredibly free resource that is wide open. I personally still spend a lot of time on YouTube watching videos of professors and experts explain content, but Udemy, Learn ArcGIS, Code Academy, LinkedIn, Esri training specifically are incredibly helpful because they offer what they call massively open online courses that you can get certified from doing. So you can have that as a resume builder to directly say, I completed this course, and they're free. So I fully recommend that. And if anyone else on the panel has a specific resource they want to name drop right now.
I think this is a lot of the ones I've used, but I think they're not all free. I think some of them may be like $20 to $50 a month, but you could get the class done a lot faster and you might get like a month free. And that's what I tried to do. I did a Coursera class on AI technology recently, and I was like, I'm going to get this done really quickly so I don't have to pay for it. So I think that's really helpful. And yeah, again, you can put it on your resume. Some of these give you a certificate at the end, so that's like a great resume thing. Even if there's no certificate, you can just say, you know, I have experience with these trainings.
And all I'll add is that you get in what you put out of these as well, or rather you get out what you put in. You can zip through and glaze over, as I might have done in college once or twice, but if you really commit to it, they are useful. All right. And then Jake, on your next slide, I have one point I want to make.
Fantastic. So let's move on to that. But before we do, Paul, personally, I don't have any LinkedIn learning courses specifically. I do recommend Code Academy and the Esri massively open online courses. But if LinkedIn Learning does work for you, then I say take it. Really anything to show that you put the effort in without having to go through a whole graduate program, which is not accessible to everybody, that's what matters at the end of the day. So the next slide of general resources. Wiggans, you want to make a point?
Yeah, we are hiring, as it says here. We haven't mentioned that today. We have 3 open positions right now. One's for a director of administration. Probably that is not something anyone on this call would be particularly interested in. But then a restoration specialist, I think is the title, for Pennsylvania work. And then a senior GIS analyst position that we're also hiring for. And then
we posted that last night, I think.
Yep.
So
it's
fresh.
Brand new.
Yeah.
So you can go to the website we've linked, and then the employment opportunities drop down. And then I want to quickly plug our ArcGIS online and portal pages. That's where we share a lot of our public facing content. Patrick mentioned his email, the list that we'll send in the email. It's a great list. I just really, really want to plug the FedGIS. So that's the Federal GIS Conference put on by Esri. It's next week. It's the 22nd to the 24th. If you're a student, you can attend for free, and that is incredible. And if you work for an NGO, you can also attend for free. This conference, you know, obviously it'd be good in person. It's normally in DC. It's a great learning opportunity. It's great to potentially network, a little harder online, but it's also really great just to be inspired about things in the field. So if you do one thing from this webinar today, maybe make sure you take coding classes and maybe register for FedGIS.
Yeah, and also just the data that I mentioned earlier, the land cover and land use, it's all free to download online on our website as well. So if you have a project, you want to download a county or state data and play with it, look at it, and just explore it, you can do that. And then there's a few links with GIS Corps and Chesapeake Conservation Corps that Jake did. C-Stream is another, I think, paid internship program with Chesapeake Bay program. So we have links there. And then of course, Patrick's list, it's awesome. There's a bunch of resources there. We'll be following up with that.
All right, so thank you everybody. As I said before, these resources will be shared out to everyone who registered, even if you couldn't make it today. So please stay tuned to your emails for that. And if you had questions specifically for one of the panelists that you didn't get to ask today, or want to follow up and learn a little bit more about what we do individually, please feel free to reach out to us at the emails listed here. This will be coming to your inbox directly from me, so keep an eye out for it. And I'd like to thank again our lovely panelists, Rachel Soobitsky, Emily Wiggans, and Patrick McCabe for taking this time today to really do first for the Conservancy and reach out to the general public and talk a little bit more about what we do. So thank you again to the three of you for taking the time today. And thank you to everyone who tuned in on their lunch hour just to hear us talk over coffee.
Thank you, Jake.
Yeah, Jake. Thanks for moderating.
Of course.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, everybody.
We hope this has been helpful. Stay in touch.
Thank you.